This is Chris Garciadis with Aqua Agitators, and today I have the pleasure of hosting my good friend Lyle. Lyle, hello. How are you doing?
Hi, Christos. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. How are things with you?
Well, everything is good. How are things with your new initiative?
So, generally speaking, yeah, going really well. I guess just as a quick introduction, as you've said, my name's Lyle King. I'm the managing director of Influx Search. We are a talent solutions business working across the water sphere more generally. So, I guess one of the main things that we're trying to tackle with Influx Search is working with businesses from right across the water and wastewater supply chain. We're working with businesses from around the world on a number of talent initiatives from attraction through to acquisition and ultimately retention of key staff. And as you've rightly said, this is somewhat of a new venture. We're now into our second year, third month of our second year, which we've got past the 1 year mark, which is always the one that the camel's back that you need to break. But yeah, generally speaking, it's going really well, and
That's really good.
very honoured to be here. I appreciate you inviting me on.
I appreciate you taking time out of your agenda to speak online. So, having already quite an experience with the water sector, what do you think are the unique challenges for recruitment in the industry?
Um, I would say like one of the biggest challenges and opportunities within the industry is, I guess, firstly having an understanding of the nuances. I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles for any partner to get their head around. Really, it is obviously an incredibly nuanced industry, and I mean that will be the same for any industry. There's always going to be nuance, but understanding how the value and supply chain works is critical and crucial in your ability to assist any business really. Working with a utility is obviously very different to working with an integrator, and working with an OEM is very different to working with a consultancy or a contractor. That in itself presents its own challenge, but having that understanding allows us the opportunity to provide value to clients that we typically work with. The challenges themselves, I know I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but the challenges themselves are quite subjective. But I think the fundamental challenge that we are trying to address, and this is an incredibly broad goal to try and tackle, but it is the talent gap that is
Mhm.
present within the industry. If we were to, I guess, surmise what our goal is at Influx Search, it is to address that gap and work with businesses on finding good people, but also then when you take a step back, working with businesses that ultimately then feed to wider industry initiative on addressing that talent gap.
And,
And like I say, that is a huge job.
and why do you think there is such a gap in the industry?
Uh, well, I think I mean, I guess when you look back at what the root causes are of it, is that you've got an aging workforce and you have fewer people joining the industry. I can't
Hmm.
remember the exact stat, but I think it's something like 8% of the workforce are under 25 or something like that, whereas 20% of the workforce are less than a decade away from retiring. So you've obviously got a mismatch there. You've got people going out, but people not coming in, and naturally that leaves a gap, and that is, I guess, the fundamental cause to it. Things that then contribute to that issue, and this is something that I've been pushing a lot recently. If you see my like LinkedIn profile or other sort of
I
socials or
follow.
our website, the narrative around the industry is
Mhm.
a contributing factor. And I think you and I have discussed this offline previously, in that if you look in the UK in particular, if you were to Google the water industry, and let's just assume right now that this is somebody who might be considering joining the water industry, not necessarily working within it currently, and they were to just Google the water industry, they would just see article after article after article of not the best press, let's be honest. It would be about a utility missing a target or storm overflows and, fines and missed regulations and everything like that, all of which then feeds into this narrative that is slow, conservative, not very well paid, everything like that. And like I say, that then feeds a wider employer brand narrative that isn't that compelling. And it's that in particular that I think needs to be changed. I think that if we tackle the narrative and start to tell more compelling stories, which
Hmm.
people from within the industry will have, and the people that work within water from around the world will have those compelling and quite interesting stories about what goes on. But then again, I guess separate to all of this, you then have an education piece that also needs work. So people need to actually understand what goes on when their tap flows and how they're actually getting water through their tap and how their toilet flushes, just at the sort of end of it. Because again, people from within the industry don't understand how they get that water or how that water is treated once
Yeah.
it leaves their premises. But yeah, like I say, taking it back to it, I think that is one of the sort of fundamental reasons as to why there is this talent gap.
So, given all the complexities of the industry and the aging personnel,
Mhm.
how do you engage with the professionals and build their personal brands in the market to
Uh,
try to get them into it?
so that again, I guess, follows on from what we're starting to touch on there, in that there's a narrative shift. Sorry, a narrative shift that
Hmm.
that's needed, and that narrative shift is, I guess, built up on individual employer brands. If we look at this from a business perspective for the time being, as opposed to personal brands of individuals, if every company that worked within the water industry had an incredibly strong employer brand, the industry would have an incredibly strong industry brand, and everybody working outside of the industry would know all of the really compelling stories as to why they should consider working within the industry. So that, I guess, is one of the fundamental things that I keep saying fundamental, but it's one of the main issues that we try and tackle prior to starting any recruitment drive. Ultimately, our core service offering is working with businesses to find them the people that they need.
Hmm.
But when you actually break that down, there's three core areas that any business should consider within their more broader talent strategy. The first piece is obviously the attraction side of things. The second piece is the acquisition phase, and then the third is the retention bit.
Hmm.
And what we're talking about here, obviously, when we're looking at employer brand in particular, is the attraction policies.
Hmm.
And that's all about how can you make your business look as attractive as possible. What compelling stories can you share that would give a prospect candidate insight into working within your business? And there are some businesses out there that get it really, they they hit the nail on the head. There are some businesses out there that do nothing and almost have a non-existent employer brand. And like I say, I think what the industry needs, but obviously what each business sort of respectively does need, is to really double down on what that employer brand message is.
Hmm.
There's a second piece to that as well, which is, with any employer brand, you also need, I guess, an EVP strategy, and your EVP is your employee value proposition.
Hmm.
And the analogy that I always like to give with both employer brand and EVP, employer brand being, what do your employees think of your business? What do your staff think of working at your business? And your EVP is obviously what your staff get in return. And the analogy I like to give is that if you think of your business as a home, your employer brand is your front window, and it's the window into your business. And
Hmm.
the stronger your employer brand, the bigger and more insightful and, I guess, interesting it is to look through this window. Your EVP is then everything cool that you've got in the house. So it's the TV on the wall and like really expensive sofa and the cool dining table and everything like that. It's a bit of a stretch really when it comes to an analogy, but like I say, if you have a strong employer brand, you're giving people the window into your company, and you're giving people the opportunity to understand what it's like working for your company. And obviously your EVP is all the fun stuff that they get along the way. But like I say, when we then look at this at a more holistic level, if every company within this industry took it upon themselves to build out a solid employer brand, the industry narrative then starts to change. And we will, as an industry, start being able to attract people into this space. So I think that's like I say, one of the fundamental things that we're trying to tackle on top of obviously our, I guess, day to day, which is obviously making sure that businesses and clients that we work with are getting the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, and I have to add to that that attracting people in general in the water industry is a bit of a difficult task given its low value
Mm-hmm.
and thus the low outcome for your efforts as an employee that you get from this company. It's a chicken and egg kind of situation that personally I don't think it will be fixed unless the sector manages to increase its own value. But that's
Yeah.
another conversation altogether, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so, what qualities would the companies seek most at this time out of their employees?
Um, I mean, I think that's a subjective question based on
Mhm.
that one business that is looking for that particular person or set of people. But I think generally, with the shift towards digital solutions that the industry is now transitioning to, it is obviously shifting a skill set requirement. So we are seeing that, people that have digital and, I guess, data analysis skill sets more generally are in demand, and that can be, data analytics. I mean, it could be water quality monitoring as an example, but
Mhm.
predictive monitoring, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those kind of skill sets are becoming more and more sought after. But then, as well as that, as these assets do become more digital, there is then a cybersecurity element to it as well. And it's obviously about protecting those critical intelligent assets from potentially digital threats. But like I say, I guess that's a chicken and the egg thing as well. You don't need the cybersecurity until you're actually digital, and you don't need digital, and it works both ways. Um, so I guess, yeah, that's certainly one area where we're seeing an uptick in demand for. But like I say, when it comes to specific skill set requirements, it's subjective. It depends on what that person is particularly looking for.
In a hard engineering industry, how
Mhm.
do you think the soft skills are valued for the water sector?
It's just, what do you mean by that?
So the thing is that um, water sector is something that should go, as far as I'm concerned, beyond the hardcore engineering in order to push a narrative, right?
Hmm.
And this requires more than hard engineering skills.
Hmm.
And I am wondering how much is the industry valuing soft skills, like a generalistic skills rather than very specific specialized ones.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say that I'm going to answer this in a slightly different way, but I think more and more businesses are, and this is, engineering companies, not exclusively, but inclusive of engineering companies, they are valuing company culture
Hmm.
just as much as they are obviously then valuing the skill set that you bring along with it. And I think if we look at the acquisition bit and we look at the recruitment bit in particular, we're moving away from box ticking exercises and moving away from just being able to do X, Y, and Z. There is then, and this is where I'm circling back to your question in the soft skills, which I think part of it is, it's not a purely cultural thing, and I do get that. But I think soft skills and the ability to learn new things and everything else that sort of comes along with that feeds into your ability to adapt more generally.
Mhm.
So yeah, but then again, it is another subjective one because you do have businesses that are very specific. We need this skill set. They need to be able to do this, this, and this. And then you have a business on the complete opposite end of the spectrum that are like, this is the job, but we'd much rather have the right culture and the right soft skills, and we will teach them how to do X, Y, and Z. So you have businesses from this side of the spectrum right through to this side of the spectrum, and obviously with that, skill set requirements vary from company A that requires the hard skills to company B that purely looks for soft skills and sort of cultural fit, and then you've
Mhm.
obviously got every business in between. So it's definitely there. Like I say, I do think that there is a shift towards the importance of culture, and I'm not saying that that wasn't there and hasn't been there previously, but I do think that it's becoming more and more important.
And speaking about company culture, what do you think companies should do for the retention of talent?
So I think I mentioned or touched on this earlier in that a comprehensive talent strategy is three core pillars. You've got
Mhm.
attraction, acquisition, and retention.
Mhm.
And obviously the retention side of it is the former bit because it's everything that you've done to attract and then ultimately acquire throughout the recruitment process. The retention piece is ultimately where all of your hard work in attraction and acquisition either pays off or falls short. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, if you can't keep hold of the staff that you've acquired, you you're spinning the wheels. You're just going to be going round and round and round and not actually growing a business.
Mhm.
Bringing in the right talent means absolutely nothing if you can't keep them engaged and motivated and satisfied. Which is obviously where the question that you just asked there about what can businesses be doing to retain staff, it's there's no one size fits all, unfortunately. It's ultimately though about keeping them engaged and keeping them motivated and keeping them satisfied in their their role. I think it fundamentally comes down to making sure that people feel valued, making sure that people have growth opportunities, making sure that they are working in a team that they enjoy working with. I think the perfect retention thing, this then feeds back into company culture in particular, that if you can have a company culture where people wake up in the morning and they want to go to work, then you've nailed it. Don't
Mhm.
change anything, keep doing exactly what it is that you're doing. But if it's not quite like, and obviously that is far easier said than done because ultimately you're running a business. But if you can get a company culture to something like that, then like I say, you've absolutely nailed it. The elephant in the room, obviously, Christos, is that, and again, it's circling back to something that you mentioned earlier, in that money talks, and it will always be a deciding factor if a person stays at your business or decides to move on. And unfortunately, we don't know a lot of incredibly deep pockets where you can just continuously pay people more and more and more and more. But pay does and always will be a huge deciding factor if someone stays. So that's why I'm sort of circling, and I don't want to bring up pay because I feel like it's a really cop out answer, and it's just like if you want to keep your staff, you just got to pay them more because I don't feel like that is the answer. I feel like if you get the culture bit right, I think the pay question becomes a smaller and smaller deciding factor. Um, but excuse me, it's certainly part of it.
It's certainly also a big issue to attracting new employees, right? From the ones that are just leaving the university. And
Mhm.
they will compare the water sector to pharma or to any other industry, and they will see way more opportunities for advancements and pay over there than in water. I have personally talked out a lot of aspiring PhDs
Hmm.
from dealing with water, exactly because of how slow things are in the water sector. And I wish I could tell them otherwise, but unfortunately, that's the situation for most of the water professionals. And yeah, as you said, it's the company culture, essentially the management culture that needs to be changed fast. Yeah, the numbers are on the table as you put them. Yeah, you have a huge number of people living in 10 years, and we simply don't have enough manpower
Hmm.
to cover things up. And like yesterday, I had a conversation with one of the top heads of one of the big consultancies, and he told me that the influx of projects for the UK is going to be so much that even if you put all the consultants together, they are not enough
Yeah.
to take care of business. So yeah, we have to solve these problems sooner than later, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and I think another challenge. I know we've talked a lot about challenges so far in this, but another challenge that we will have. We've obviously mentioned that we're undergoing this digital transformation era, um, and with that, there's a need for digital skill sets. But you are then competing against, and I'm not saying that it's exclusively, but you've got the Googles of the world and the Amazons of the world and these huge corporate machines that can pay significantly more than what the vast majority, I mean, I would say the vast majority of businesses everywhere, but specifically, within the water industry, you can't compete on salary there. You just simply can't do it unless you've got, like I say, unless you've got really deep pockets. But that then, like I say, that feeds into the narrative side of things. There has to be the compelling story as to why somebody should join your business
Hmm.
and the good that you are doing in that role, which, like I say, feeds back into what we've gone through earlier. That the narrative shift is fundamental if we're going to actually be able to attract people into the industry. Because I'm not saying the money's bad by any means. I think there are some companies out there that pay really well, and there are companies out there that pay very, very well. But when you compare them, and this is obviously using the Googles and the Amazons of the world, you're just never going to be able to compete with those. So, like I say, it's the narrative shift and the compelling stories that should, in my opinion, start to at least address, maybe not tackle, but address, this talent gap issue that we're facing.
And speaking about digitalization, how do you think that has changed in the last years, the recruitment in the water companies?
Like the recruitment process in particular.
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
there's
AI
there's more and
assessments,
yeah,
data map.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's more and more coming online, and I think a lot of it is really useful. Like it is, we've invested in a lot of digitalization solutions, not so much on the AI side, but processes or being able to automate processes and things like that. Like I'm all for it. I think that if there's tools out there that makes your job easier, then
Mhm.
there's a use case for it. What I'm concerned about is the whole AI screening and the AI interviewing and removing the human element from what is a very human centric job in the first place. I don't think that recruitment in particular, but HR, I guess, if you want to brand it
Mhm.
under that umbrella, will ever be replaced by technology. I don't think there is the place to remove that human intervention with something that is incredibly emotional. You changing job isn't a rational decision. It is an emotionally driven decision. And I think if you were to rely on AI and data, there's going to be mismatch along the way. So I definitely think there's a place for it, and I do think that a lot of good has come from new digital solutions and, like I say, artificial intelligence and things like that. But when we talk about recruitment processes in particular, you're never going to be able to move away from. I mean, we're still speaking online today, but the human the human interaction and the human interventions always going to trump the digital solution, in my opinion.
So Given everything that we have talked up to now, the
Mhm.
challenges, um, the upcoming changes in the industry, how do you think the future will be formed for the industry in the next 5, 10 years, personnel wise?
I mean, I think it's fundamentally going to be dictated by this transition that we're in. You know, the digital transformation transition. We're going to need upskilling. There's going to be an upskilling or reskilling requirement as much as there is going to be a need for new talent
Hmm.
generally. So I think that's going to obviously dictate the way that the challenges of workforce are tackled. It's ultimately going to be thinking ahead, thinking about the jobs that are going to be required 5, 10 years from now, and then thinking about the contingency plans of how we look to fill those seats as we move towards it. And like I say, that then feeds into, or it feeds into the silver tsunami thing, which I guess is again something that we talked about earlier, in that we've got a lot of people that are retiring. There's a knowledge gap there because obviously, as those people retire, they take that knowledge with them. Some of that knowledge might not be needed because, like I say, the industry's changing.
Hmm.
But it's about making sure that there's contingency plans in place for those that are retiring and making sure that that knowledge is kept in house. But then also a reskilling and an upskilling initiative that's going to need to be tackled in order to bridge the gap and look to shrink it over the next 5, 10 years. And that's the thing as well, is that that's going to come around really quickly. Before we know it, we will be
Exactly.
into 2030, and all of a sudden the problems that we were thinking were tomorrow are actually today's problems. So we need to start thinking about it now in order to be able to tackle
The problems are always closer than you think.
it.
I'm I'm a full advocate of this theory. So, what would be the advice that you would give to new graduates right now in order to enter this space and fill it in?
The first bit of advice I would say is don't read everything, or don't take everything that you read or hear in media. And I'm referring to British media at this point, because I
Hmm.
know that this will be different in other parts of the world. Don't take everything that you read in that, in those forums as gospel. Um, I would say, particularly for graduates and entry level people that are looking to jump into this industry, I would say that volunteer work goes a long way.
Hmm.
If you can get involved with community projects or some environmental organizations where they are maybe looking for volunteering or something like that, something that would demonstrate your passion for wanting to start in this industry, I think that goes a long way. But then there are also other organizations that they could potentially look into that again just demonstrates their commitment to wanting to work in this space, because we've got to remember as well is that hiring managers are always looking for why that one person, and you've got to do what separates you from other people. So if you can work on yourself, you obviously give yourself the best opportunity of landing that job that you are looking for. But I mean, organizations like the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, CIWAM. But again, like other certifications that you could potentially get, other organizations that you can get. Um, just anything that would help separate you from the other person next to you that is potentially applying from that job, would be two, I guess, two or three things that I would recommend. But I guess this is a bit of a shameless plug, really, at this point, Christos. But I hope you don't mind. We are looking to address that influx search. We're looking to
Hmm.
assist businesses in their hunt for the right graduates. So something that we are looking to achieve over the next year really is setting strategic partnerships with universities. We'll be tackling the UK first before
Hmm.
branching out further afield to give businesses access to that talent and looking to streamline things. So if there are graduates listening to this, then I'll be very keen to have a chat.
I'd like to thank you very much, not only for talking, but also for helping us in general as an industry. We definitely need more Lyles out there, that's for certain. Um, I will be looking forward to catching up with you and see how your opinions progress, yeah, about the industry. Lyle, thank you very much for being online with us. Much appreciated. Take care, and we will definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much, Christos, and speak to you soon.